Hi, BookTube. Welcome to a Sideline. This is a response to Ollie at Criminoli. I say response. Brian at Bookish Texan actually called it thievery, but I feel fairly sure that Ollie gave us permission to do this if we wanted to. Anyway, look, the video he made about 4 days ago was talking about the 10 books that made the biggest impact on his lifelong reading. And I was tempted to make a response right away until I started scratching down my list and I thought, oh, there's so much nonfiction and unconventional stuff here, and I thought this is just too weird. This isn't really in the spirit of the thing. And this is still true, even though I am making the video. But it is honest, it is dead honest. And in the end, I thought, well, maybe there's somebody else out there with a reading journey that is just as weird. And maybe they are doing what I am doing. They're holding back instead of sharing and making it clear to everybody that we're all very weird as individuals and that this is just fine, just fine. All my selections here are what I'm going to call tip of the iceberg, or I suppose you could also say gateway books. That's another way of looking at it. Reading these books, or in some cases, it's not just about reading a particular book, but just reading. I'll have to elaborate. But it cracked open my brain or gave me a new insight. And that insight was the beginning of more reading to cover off a topic more broadly. Does that make sense? And I've tried to arrange these books in chronological order in the date that I encountered them, not necessarily the date that they were published. Book 1, Fat is a Feminist Issue, by Susie Orbach, published in 1978. I read it, I'm saying 85, could have been 85, 86, not entirely sure. Like most young women, I had body issues and weight issues and disordered eating when I was in my teens and my early 20s. I had read a number of other books to try and solve the problem, but this was the book that really began the process of rethinking. And even though it is now 4 years short of its 50th birthday, I believe the ideas haven't aged and they haven't proved now to be unhelpful. I think, in fact, I feel confident that a 16-year-old now could read this book and still learn from it, still learn how to love themselves better, see their body differently. This was my gateway also to feminist literature. And not that I've read much, you understand, but I suppose that's because Susie Orbach set a precedent. I now, if I'm looking for feminist writers to read, I'm wanting to get a sense from their books, a sense of love, and love that isn't limited to certain kinds of bodies. And when I say that, I include male bodies and non-white bodies and people who wish they were not put into certain categories or made to live up to certain expectations because of their bodies. That's very important. Book number 2, The Tempest, by Heather Douglas. That's me, by the way. That's a pen name. I got to explain, right? This is where it gets a little strange. I have been a writer for nearly as long as I've been a reader. I've made almost no money from writing, but that's not the subject that I want to talk about in this video. When I was 14 in 1978, I joined an evangelical Christian church, and that defined my life until I left in 1999. The church was very much against reading fiction or writing fiction. And so in response to that, I put myself through a dry spell. From about 1982 to 1992, I didn't read anything except church literature and the Bible, and I didn't write anything except sermon notes or meditation journals, things that would make the church happy with me. In 1992, I started a new job where I was alone for most of the day in an office. And my boss said to me, as long as you carry out the tasks that I give you to do, what you do to entertain yourself for the rest of your time is up to you. So I decided, even though it was pushing the boundaries of what I felt was acceptable, I decided to try reading novels again. And I never wrote down all the books that I read because I got through quite a few, as you can imagine. I usually had about 4 hours free during the day when I wasn't doing something that was part of my job. I can remember Gone with the Wind was one of them, but that's not trying to make it special in any way. I read a lot of books. But more importantly, I think, than just the reading, was that I had time to really digest what I was reading, and I had time to just daydream, to just think. And that was a luxury because the church kept me very, very busy. And anyone who knows cults will recognize that that's a tactic to keep people from having time to think. Anyway, in 1993, after a year of having all this free mental time, I had a very, very strange experience. The best way I can describe it is that part of my brain seemed to split off and become a separate consciousness. And it took over and it started to tell me a story, a visual story. It was like having a long waking dream that I could not control. And for several weeks, I found it very difficult to keep my concentration on what was actually happening in the world around me, and I had difficulty sleeping. It was a story that used the original Star Trek series characters, and it focused on Spock, and that should be no surprise to anybody because, yes, I am one of that species, the thousands of Star Trek fans with a fixation on Spock. Anyway, the whole experience was exhausting and frightening, and the only way I could finally take my brain back and get this waking dream to stop was to write down the story. And that's what I did. And that is what The Tempest is. The Tempest is a very bad Star Trek screenplay, okay? Which doesn't matter because I've only ever shown it to one other person. So, there. The important thing about writing The Tempest was that it reconnected me to my need to write and my need to read, which I should never have disconnected with. Book number 3. Well, once I regained my love of reading and writing again, it wasn't long before I discovered the Hay Festival of Literature, and myself and the person who watches television from 1996 to about 2002, we would attend pretty much every year. And I didn't actually hear Elaine Aron speak. She must have been speaking at a festival, and I discovered her book browsing in, the festival always had a main bookshop on site, which would carry all the books written by the authors who were presenting, and you could buy them whether you'd seen their talks or you hadn't. But I'm really glad that I discovered this book. Aron's concept of high sensitivity as a brain architecture seemed to explain me. It seemed to explain how my brain worked. At least when I started to work with myself on the assumption of having high sensitivity, suddenly I was coping better with work and I was coping better with life in general. And so this book also was the tip of the iceberg in that it made me open to this whole concept that brains could be different, really different. And of course that led me to reading books like Oliver Sacks, talking about people with brain injuries and how the brain tries to repair itself, tries to compensate. And it also led me to read books like Steve Silberman's Neurotribes and learn more about the autism spectrum. Book 4. Revelations, a collection of gay male coming out stories, which I read in 1997, 1998. Again, not 100% sure. This was such an unassuming little book, very thin, and it was easy to slip into the nonfiction section of a bookshelf because, as you can see, even from this picture of the spine does not tell you the subject matter of the book, which is interesting. Now, of course, I was still attending church, right? And you've probably already guessed what the position of my evangelical Christian church was on same-sex attraction. Yeah, they disapproved of it. Yeah, they were against it, and I would describe the hostility as obsessive. Like they would go on and on about it. And this had bothered me for a long time, this whole opposition. For example, the church reacted when Boy George first released Karma Chameleon back in 1983, and they said, don't listen to it, don't watch the videos. Or, you can't help but see the videos. But I remember seeing them and thinking, wait, I like that song. I don't have a problem with any of this. So this was all just a great big hanging question mark in my mind for 15 years. And I discovered Revelations while I was casually browsing in a branch of my county library. And I knew the church had it wrong, and I'm going to credit this book for being the first, it was the first push that made me think, I got to get out of there, and I got to rethink all my opinions on everything from the ground up. And this book should also tell you where I stand on book banning in libraries. I'm going to use this opportunity to thank the librarian who was brave enough to put a copy of Revelation out on the shelves, because you know what, people are funny about this, always wanting to withhold knowledge from other people. This book helped me, and I bet it helped other people, and so I'm thanking that librarian for having that courage. Book number 5, The Christian Agnostic by clergyman Leslie Weatherhead. 1999 was when I read it. It was published back in 1965. 1999, of course, was the year I finally stopped attending church. Although it's true that my belief in Christianity as the church sold it to me, that had been falling apart pretty nicely for the 2 years before that time. What surprised me is Leslie Weatherhead was this elderly, respectable-looking clergyman who was questioning all traditional Christian beliefs and asking, do we need belief? Could we have a completely different basis for Christianity? And it began this huge questioning process. In fact, this is the tip of probably the biggest iceberg. And to be honest, I could do a 10-book list on all the reading about spirituality and religious history, multiple religions, because I have done so much reading as a result of coming out of the church and just trying to reorient myself and going, where do I want to be? What's going on? What's really happening? So much reading. But this book was the place where it all started. Book number 6, Wild Mind by Natalie Goldberg. Don't actually know when I read Natalie's book. It could have been the late 1990s, could have been the early 2000s, so I'm picking 2000 to just be somewhere in the middle. Her book has been a kind of background noise, ambient noise, nothing disturbing, whenever I'm creative, or it's also the measure of what is good in reading. That is, it's made me ask myself when I'm writing, am I being honest in fiction? And also looking for honesty as a quality in what I read. And that's, in fiction, it's a peculiar kind of honesty because fiction is made up. But there is, I think, a quality of honesty in fiction which I think readers can discern. They may not be able to describe exactly how it works, but even so, they should begin to discern it if they've been reading a lot of books and a broad range of books over time. And it was Natalie Goldberg who taught me how much honesty and also being kind to oneself was critical for producing good writing. Book 7, The Tarot Handbook by Angeles Arrien, published in 1987. I read in 2002. I always worry when I talk about my interest in tarot online because I think, people are going to make a judgment based on what they think tarot cards are or what they think I believe about them or do with them. And there is that stereotype, isn't there? There's the fortune teller or the psychic who uses the cards to manipulate people. And actually, it's not a stereotype. They are out there in quantity. And I should say that I don't like most of the tarot readers that I encounter online or in person. And then there's also the stereotype, isn't there, of the person who gets all a bit mystical and woo-woo, and they're just too superstitious. They take the cards too serious. I don't like those readers either. And now you might be wondering, well, what's left? And I understand the question. I understand the question because tarot is a world that can be full of woo-woo types that I would not trust. Finding a sensible tarot reader or a sensible tarot book, it takes a lot of looking. I won't, beat around the bush about that. I was fortunate. I made friends with a sensible tarot reader, and she recommended Angeles Arrien's book as a great starting point for learning tarot symbolism and then learning how to use the cards as a tool for self-understanding and growth. That book was the gateway to other good books and good podcasts, not very many, but they're out there. And the experience then, of course, that you gather from just doing readings helps. I mean, if anybody wants me to do a video where I talk about how I approach the tarot and do readings, I know that it's out, it's going off the book topic, but if you want to know, I'm happy to share that in sort of a non-woo-woo kind of way. Okay. And book number 8 is The Mill on the Floss by George Eliot. Okay, about me, I am a late life graduate. I dropped out of university when I was in my teens. That did have something to do with the church, but I don't want to go into detail. I didn't get a chance to fix my mistake until 2016. And of course, I wanted to study English Lit. But I didn't really understand, what does it mean to study English literature? Literature, the point of teaching it is to teach close reading and to give the student practice doing that reading, but also practice in then taking the ideas they believe they've pulled from that reading and presenting them in writing and being able to present evidence from the text to back up any idea that you're saying is being expressed in that same text. And like anything that you practice, right? The first times you do it, you're slow, you're awkward, and then it gets a little better, and it gets a little better. And then I think for all students, I hope anyway, there comes a point, a breakthrough moment, when you're not only doing it really well, but you realize that you know exactly how and why you're doing it well. And for me, this was the point where I wrote the essay that I was assigned about the mill on the Floss. It was an essay that I almost gave up writing because the novel seemed to defeat all my attempts at trying to understand it. But I tried to stay honest about what I saw in the text, even though that wasn't leading me to any grand interpretation of the book. In fact, my essay was really admitting that I couldn't come to one conclusion, that I had to allow for a number of different possibilities. And that was when I realized that I understood what my coursework was trying to teach me. My coursework, studying literature, is looking for possibilities. It is looking for lines of thought which can be defended using the text itself. But if you are true and you understand that process, you know that yours is never the only line of thought. It's just one of many. And it's also taught me that many writers, and definitely Eliot is among them, I think they wrote their books with some intention that readers would do more than just read them as a bit of entertainment. They read them as if they would be studied. And, I just thought that may be a really good definition of what we call literary fiction. Let's say that literary fiction, as a working definition, is the kind of fiction where the author has some intention in the back of their mind that their book it can be read, yes, but it would be better if it were studied. Book number 9, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. And I know I read this before the pandemic, because when I finished it, I lent it to a friend and I gave it to them face to face. And this is a real tip of the iceberg book. I was just another one of those white people that Renee was probably sick of talking to. I was unaware of what it meant to live in skin that has more melanin. I saw little things that were wrong, but I just didn't get that they were really just a small example of something that was much bigger. And I say this, and I think the people on BookTube will understand that I'm not condoning a riot, but simply stating that to my mind, riots are usually symptomatic of the existence of a great deal of anger that people feel they can't express through the proper channels because they feel the proper channels are just not working for them. And certainly I hold up my hand. It was the 2020 Black Lives Matter riots that made me finally go and think, wow, that's a lot of anger. And then you realize there's something I'm not seeing here. And just in the same way that I finally realized that the church was the wrong place to be, that I had to get somewhere else, in the similar way, I realized wherever you are now is not right. You got to get yourself somewhere else. And so that was the start of a very wide reading journey, which encompassed, I guess, not just race, but I guess bigger issues of non-Europeanness, if that makes any sense. It means that I'm now trying to read more non-European writers, and I'm also looking to expand my history knowledge out of Europe and just, see how much my social eyesight can improve. And finally, book 10, which is The Place Between by Cy Signy. This is an online work of fan fiction, and it would not surprise me if people assumed from looking at my channel content that I have a snobbery about what gets called, trashy fiction. The kind of books that people read for the Garb August event, for example. So I think it's important that I make a statement right here, right now, okay? I read online fan fiction, and yes, I found a lot of stories that I didn't like, but I also found quite a few that I loved, and this is one of them. It was written by a student while they were studying for their PhD dissertation, and yeah, a lot of fan fiction writers are students, I found. The Place Between is a fan fiction based on the 2009 Star Trek movies that J.J. Abrams directed. It focuses on the relationship between Lieutenant Uhura and Spock. And I have also written fan fiction. I hope that finally breaks the snobbery mold. I've written fan fiction. I've written 500,000 words of fan fiction. I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed the interaction that I could have with readers, because it's very much the same as the interaction you can have on a BookTube channel in the comments section. If I had more time to read, if I wasn't working full time, you would probably see more popular fiction talked about on this channel. You get rare glimpses here and there, but I have no snobbery about it. It's purely a question of time. And please remember, I lost a lot of years as an evangelical Christian not reading, so I got like so much catching up to do. So you've got to let me have a bit of that. Okay, that's my list. I hope you enjoyed it. Now, I did say I was going to talk about William Faulkner's As I Lay Dying. I'm thinking I may or may not do a review. Depends. I might just do a short video giving some first impressions, because As I Lay Dying was clearly a book that needs revisiting, and I may do that just to make sure I get the maximum I can out of it. Oh, but before I go, my next nonfiction review is going to be of a very feline nature, and so what I'd love is to be able to post photographs of cats that belong to BookTube creators, and of course advertise their channel as well, give them a shout out and a mention and direct people there to give you more subscribers. If you're interested in sharing a photograph of your pet, please check my description box. I'll have instructions for how to contact me, and I'll reply to you to confirm that your photograph is going to be shown, and also confirm the video publication date. Okay, now I got to get going, everybody. Enjoy very much your September reading, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.